Okay. And I think I'm probably going to try a PDF because you can just kind of scroll through them. And I'll post the PDF too. So anybody can,
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Blandin Community Broadband Program Roundtable discussion. Thanks for joining us. Today we have Ann Bradis from the, gosh, you have so many titles, I don't even know which one to say. So we'll let you introduce yourself, but first let me turn it over to Bill.
Sure.
Thanks, Mary, and welcome everyone. And luckily for you, I don't have much to say on this topic today. So it's a looking to learn with the rest of everyone. I just know that in today's media environment, local papers, weeklies are going to, or dailies are going to a couple days a week, and more occasional papers are disappearing, and a whole new model of community communications, I think, is required. And that's what Ann Bradis is going to talk to us about. Ann, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for joining. Bill is right. I'm passionate about communicating. I've been a lifelong journalist. I worked in the Twin Cities at both the Pioneer Press and the Star Tribune at different times and around the country. And then I started my own science writing consultancy 20 years ago. And I do what's called translational writing. I communicate complexity for leading researchers, Mayo Clinic, Harvard Clinical Research Group, American Association for the Advancement of Science. So that is weirdly what led me to kids, is that I started writing curriculum for kids, science curriculum in preschool when I was working at the Bakken Museum in Minneapolis on electricity and life. And I just was amazed at their creative problem solving, which I knew from my adult life would have taken weeks of meetings, to come up with this kind of insight. So I have been working with kids for 25 years, in addition to my science writing, and I have done that through the Minnesota Institute for Talented Youth, where I've been a master teacher for 20 years and on the board for 6. Last year, inspired by Blandin, because I moved to Grand Marais 6 years ago, and Blandin helped us set up a children's digital newspaper called Boreal Core. And we did it for all these reasons: to give kids digital 21st century skills, to connect community, and to really leverage the power of broadband in our fantastic Cook County. So last fall, I started the Minnesota Children's Press. And I'm now the executive director, and I have a board of 12 members from around the state, and we're always looking for more. Strange to say, we like a lot of voices in the choir. So our mission is to mentor rural Minnesota children. And as you see, we start younger than most people might think, at age 5 and up to 15. And we do developmentally appropriate projects with them. It's immersion. If it were in a Canadian university system, it would be a practicum, a co-op, that by shadowing and working with mentors who are professionals, kids come to learn these skills and integrate them into their own workflows and habits of mind. And at a very young age, where it's part of their identity. That is really crucial to me, because I know from teaching at the Minnesota Institute for Talented Youth, by 4th grade, kids check out. They've decided they can't draw, they can't do math, they're not a good runner. The no, it's the era of no sets in. I am working with yes, and that's where my focus is, the youngest kids. So yes becomes the mindset of life. So start when young, but of course, I'm happy to get the older middle kids too now. I have some editing, some manuscripts of mine. What we do is entrepreneurial writing. Now I emphasize entrepreneurial because I want them to see that they have agency, that their actions have impact in the world if they master and they discipline these skills. So, and they can make a living doing this. So we write, we illustrate, we publish, and on multiple technology. It's not simply, Office 360 or whatever. It's like, come on, we're doing whatever it takes to get the messages out. The goal is developing these competencies so they are career ready and college ready, if college is still a thing. And I think in this summer, we all have to ask that question. Is college a thing? Or as Bill said, do we need really radical new models of learning, being, and problem solving? And I would say, if so, we need to, well, I would say yes. And I would say we need, not only as we know in these recent months of the wounds of racism, we need to broaden the generational reach, bring in the elders and the youngest. They have things to contribute. And the goal is to really just what Blandin is about, connecting and vivifying rural communities. In particular, children's publication can reach these soft areas of inclusivity, isolation, loneliness, empathy, and what I call a purpose gap. The people who feel so left out in the fast pace of this changing world, they don't know why they're here. Kids can help just in their understanding, in their empathy, in their acceptance. And they often come to things, the youngest one, without judgment. So I think these are really important because, as we also know in our fraught public life, decisions are not driven by data, they're emotional in the end. We need data, but we also need to help emotional kind of modeling. So here is me some years ago in Mighty. So this is what Mighty looks like in St. Paul. These were obviously urban kids from mainly Twin Cities. It's not enough statewide, and I wish it were. I taught a class, I developed a class called the Aerobic Newspaper, where we walked around St. Paul for 3 hours. We never sat, walking, observing, interviewing, writing, illustrating. We even were jumping up and down or marching as they were writing. The point was stay moving. For 9 years, I wrote the Mayo Clinic Orthopedic Newsletter, and if I took away anything from that, it was movement for your joints is nutrition. You must move all the time. So that's what I taught my kids, that we're gonna move the whole time. And it was wonderful because, as you know, with a busy family, you often don't have time to do those high parenting acts you wish you did, like how to luxuriate in a park and talk to a child or help a strange child build a sandcastle, just busy life. So we could do that in class, and we made newspapers. And here we are, we're demonstrating, we make rain gear too. We went out all the time unless it was lightning. So we just took all the trash bags, the clean ones, and duct tape and made our rain gear. So that's my inspiration. Minnesota Institute for Talented Youth is, I know kids are that capable. There's a video introduction that just shows many kinds of my classes, and I'm gonna skip those, but if you want them, I'll send them to you. It's a 2-minute video. I want to get to the good part, the Blandin Broadband Innovation Grant of 2017 that changed my life. I was in Grand Marais then. I was working for a reinvented broadband group called Boreal Access. They originally were providing email. And then, as we know, the whole culture of internet and broadband and delivery changed so much that that wasn't enough. They had competitors, so they had to reinvent themselves. They wanted to be kind of a digital hub, and they wanted to remake their website. So I got in early to help them with that. And they were halfway through the web project. I hadn't seen it, but they said their biggest problem was their emails were so old, built on old technology, that they needed to migrate to a new platform. So I helped them develop that through a Blandin Broadband Innovation Grant. The innovation was enlisting children to write community news. So that is what we did. And that is our newspaper at borealcore.org. Again, just in interest of time, because I want to hear from you. I'm not going to go there, but please do, and you'll see the kind of things they've written. It's really fun for me to go back there because we hardly deleted anything, so it functions like a yearbook. And we see all the fun projects that they've done. And this is Sammy Garrity, one who was in 6th grade at the time. She was one of our Boreal Corps, we call them Story Scouts. And she was invited by Mary to go down to the state capitol as the Broadband Day on the Hill and advocate for the need of fast, stable, widespread, reliable broadband throughout rural areas. And Sammy was extremely evocative, not at all intimidated by speaking with panelists and shiny wood desks. And she told them the stories of her classmates who were lingering on the bus to get their homework done, or slinking in and out of class, or thinking of dropping out. They were so far behind because too much of their homework was online and the teachers didn't realize what a challenge that was. So Sammy was a great, great witness and advocate for broadband, and she still is. She still writes with me. Our method is, as I say, it's entrepreneurial. So we find projects that the community needs, and they might be books. I've had a child as young as 3 work with mentors, and because they're working with mentors, it's me or a group of other people who are professionals. You can take very young children and help connect the dots that cognitively they may not have. but every 3-year-old can draw a picture. Now, is it a perfect picture? No, but with a few little intensifying strokes from Photoshop and maybe another illustrator to put some dots in or an arrow or this or that, you'll get a good illustration. So we do some books. We certainly do children's newspapers. We've done websites, podcasts. Social media management is in demand. Many businesses in Grand Marais, for example, they just don't really care about it. I mean, they like to be on Facebook, but they don't like the formal messaging and the marketing and the strategic social media use. And children are extremely adept at that. So we see that as a niche. And because we're entrepreneurial, we think that way, like where could we grow and get donations? Because we want to raise money. One of the first words kids learn with working with me is deliverables. Now, very few writers call what they make deliverables. I do. And I have made a living with deliverables. I've taught college classes called 9 Ways in 9 Days to Make a Living Writing. It's 9 different products. And in my mind, it doesn't demean any of it. And there's certainly room and need in this world for artistic writing. But it is very difficult to make a living artistically. And I really feel that's important in Grand Marais because it's an arts community. And many of the people, so it's kind of divided by people who have made their money elsewhere and they've discovered arts, that's nice. And then the starving artists, but there's not a middle class of artists. I would like to see that if children so choose. And I want them to have the confidence that, oh yeah, I can grow up writing, illustrating, publishing, managing social media. There's lots of things for me and I can do it in my house and make a living. So that's what we try. This is an example of the products we make. These are some of the signs, Bernadine, that they might have seen. I'll have close-ups later, but you'll see they're right along the boulevard. This is Lake Superior, and this road goes right to the library. This is a very common walking street. And we're doing what we called an arts intervention for public health messaging, that we wanted them to be friendly, a little bit playful, but a hard border, masks, social distancing, no exceptions, hand washing, thinking of others, kindness. So we had very clear messaging. And then we put that out to the Chamber of Commerce and we've gotten partners and they've donated and then they get signs and we install them. So that the kids see the entire arc of a commercial, what could be a commercial transaction service, that we not only made the product, we also served our client. And then we follow up. Is this working for you? Can I readjust your sign? Blah, blah. So they get some really practical good skills. Here's what we do with our money. Remember I called them story scouts. The model really is Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. As we know, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts sell overpriced things that we buy and we're happy to, such as cookies and popcorn. You know, I've never felt bad paying, you know, what is it, $8 or $9 or $12 for that Boy Scout popcorn or the $5 for Girl Scout cookies. It's all good. So we're story scouts, and what we sell though are things we make, our deliverables, and then we start them in early philanthropy. They decide what the money should go to. This is log rolling, and our current one of our campaigns is to get a new cover for this log. In Grand Marais, the Y has a competitive log rolling team, which is, I will say, a champion team, and they beat Hayward last year. So these logs are sort of a styrofoam composite, but they're covered with fabric. And though the kids wear shoes, our current practice log has a rip in this fabric, so it'd be really easy when these things start spinning to get your toe caught in it, and then you fall and then you lose. So a fabric cover costs $800. So we are raising money. We are selling these signs and some others to buy a new fabric cover for our log, because the Y opened last week part-time and the log rolling team is back on the log. So here's another thing, Bernadine, probably people were seeing. We made these, working with kids and mentors, we made these Burma Shave signs. They did not know what Burma Shave was, right? So we got a little history lesson. We got a history on early advertising, on the role of car vacations in family life in the 50s. My husband did the original ones. He is an engineer of a certain age that took draftsmanship. So they saw an engineer who can actually measure, plan, and print. And they helped him. And they saw how this is done, because most people now just use a font and layout. So they've never really seen someone make a sign. We made a bunch of these Burma Shave signs and they're up all over town, again, for donations. So this is how we've raised money. We also then we had the kids illustrate. Once we had the jingles, then we had the kids illustrate and see how you use Photoshop to capture the children's printing. And I think, Bernadine, this is what's appealing to some of the people, and what I was saying earlier about the gentle messaging, because it's clearly childlike and you feel a bit protective. You don't want to just push back as you might in line going, I'm not wearing a mask at this place. So we think there's some effectiveness to that. And actually we've talked about how would we determine that? So we ask true entrepreneurial questions. How would we assess and measure our work? Okay, here's just a close-up. So we're trying to spread these child illustrated posters. This said they drank together all as brothers and spread the virus to countless others. Now that's also rendered in Burma shave style on 4 signs around the roadside. Gentle mask messaging, which as we all know is so needed. We welcome you with this small task. Keep all safe, please wear a mask. And we've met with kids to emphasize that we cannot deviate from our messages that must be kind, gentle, but clear, both visually and textually. Those are life skills, as we all know. How many hours of meetings have we spent doing this? Here we have, now we translated these into a font. So we worked with the kids to pick a font that looked like, this is my husband, look like, and this is Eric Humphrey, who owns Lake Superior Trading. So we're partnering now with businesses. And they wanted a set of the signs, but he wanted them just stacked, not like Burma shave. And then he's got another message on the back. So we gave Eric, for a donation, this set of signs. And then we noticed he didn't put them up right away, though we asked if he wanted help. So with the kids, we had another meeting. And they said, you know, this is not helping Eric because he's at the cash register a lot and he does get mask pushback and distancing pushback. And I said, we got to help him. What can we do? And then that's where our service model came in. I said, we're full service. We're going to go hang those signs. We'll take them wherever people need them, and we'll just tell them that from the get-go. You donate, we'll bring your signs, and we'll hang them the way you want. So that was a great success. Eric then also wanted it illustrated. He wanted to help warn the people standing 6 feet apart in line at his store. And we are trying to diffuse and get the mindset like, come on, it's just kids. We're all working together. Not a big deal. So we're really getting a public health strategy here. So that's our method. And our madness is one day, where does all this lead? Well, we hope, well, I do dream, and so does my board, because they're all artistic, they're all entrepreneurs, and they're all child-oriented. They're fantastic people. We would like to remediate the news deserts that Bill and Bernadine have certainly referenced, that we are losing community voices, and what we're getting is a consolidated Fargo Forum News, which, you know, that's okay, but it's not local enough for me. So we want to remediate news deserts, and through that, we re-engage communities. And we think we can do that. We would love to see a statewide, child-staffed, mentored, of course, newspaper, largely written by children. We want them to leverage broadband to make community news. So that is where I am, and I'd love to hear your ideas, reactions, or experience with any of this.
Does anyone on the call have other examples where they're dealing with kids in media, or even in your own communities where you're trying to save your newspaper or alternative newspapers are springing up?
Yeah, who's lost a newspaper?
You know, I can comment that at Blandin Foundation, we are really curious about where people go in small towns that have lost their newspapers or haven't had one for news. What is the news, the media ecosystem, if you will, there? Where do people go? And we're finding in some of the research we've done in a couple communities in our county that Facebook is often a go-to place. So there'll be a Facebook site, and official or not, that people use a lot as a source of news. That seems to be the social media platform that at least grown-ups use a lot in lieu of, you know, formal newspapers. Is that true for other communities?
It's true in Grand Marais. Grown-ups use Facebook, and kids use Instagram and Snapchat. So we have only an Instagram channel, and we're focusing all our effort on getting the most out of that channel. And maybe we'll move to other platforms, but just one at a time. How about others?
I see Beth Pierce on the line, and I'm wondering, how is across the Iron Range, how do you see media being used around the public health issue these days? Or how do your clients, tourism attractions, how are they dealing with that, Beth? I see Beth there, but I don't hear her. She's not muted. Becky, in the North Woods of Pine County, how does the news spread there? You're muted. Oh, there you go.
Unmute. Well, I went and grabbed the two newspapers. I get the Moose Lake newspaper and the Ascove American. And at my company, when we weren't all working remotely, I had 3 sitting areas in the hallways, one with the Moose Lake paper, one with the Ascove paper, and one with the Sandstone paper. And it was always fun to watch the employees stand there or sit at those tables reading the local news. And the North Star Media is the entity that is the owner of all of these newspapers. And I thought that maybe they weren't going to be able to keep going, but they are going, and the newspapers are still coming. And what they're doing is, in a lot of the communities, they're using a lot of the people from the community to write the articles. And they've reached out to ask people to submit information. And so here they are, they're still going. We still have our local news and the headlines from the local activity. I'm very, very impressed with them. I was trying to see and hear, it's North Star Media Incorporated, and it's, I think it's in Cambridge. The headquarters are in Cambridge. They bought the local newspapers up here, but I just thought that you all and Ann would be interested in how they're continuing to do that anyway.
That is interesting to see the volunteers as the main reporters and crowdsourced news, essentially, and almost like Facebook, but in print. So that is where people are going to an event and taking a picture and then sending it in, instead of to Facebook, sending it in to a publisher who's going to print that. That's an interesting.
Right, but they still do have the headlines from the board meetings and all of the city board meetings and the local organizations meetings. So they do have reporters that cover all those meetings. So they do have that local news as well.
I'm reminded of, was it Spicer Schools, Mary and Bill, that in a high school, that their kids were partnering with local businesses and the local community to do public service announcements?
Oh,
Lac La Parle, okay. And maybe it was both PSAs and then actual ads, right, for local products that were produced in town.
And they also had a news show.
Yeah.
That was a podcast.
A podcast. And was it local news, Bill, or just school news?
I think it was some of each. I think there's a focus on school, and I'm not sure that they sent it out to the.
That one, it was over YouTube.
Oh, okay.
That show that they did for a couple of years. Yeah, they had a class. It was the I'm trying to remember the one teacher who did a lot of that, and he worked with some of the coding, but he also was a lot with cameras and how to interview, and they did a good job.
There was another one. There was one besides Lac La Parle. It was from Merck that I think Bernadine is referring to. I remember they did like a soda or, yeah, I can't remember the school though, but I remember it wasn't Lac La Parle. It was one of those little towns in maybe UMVRDC.
But Anne, I was thinking,
Yeah.
Anne brought us because they were doing commercials. So it had that how to survive, you know, how to be an artist from an entrepreneurial business perspective as well. And
Yeah.
it connected the school to the local business community, who then saw those kids, I think, in a new way as a resource for helping them promote, you know, local pride, local community. And you're right, I love that idea about when it's in a kid's hand, that it somehow it like takes away, I mean, it takes away, it de-weaponizes somehow the adult perceiving the
does.
message.
Yeah, I think so. I would love to talk to these other groups and perhaps see if we can't start an informal alliance, because we're just starting podcasts in WTIP because on our board is Patrick Knight, who was a Blandin Leadership Fellow, and he has worked at WTIP for many years. He works for the city now, but he just joined our board, and he's delighted to be sort of the video and podcast guru.
Well, one of the reasons I think this topic is so timely is we're really grappling here in northern Minnesota in our county with public norming for response to COVID and how to keep everybody healthy.
Yes.
And, you know, this cultural divide that we are experiencing in our nation about the response and mask wearing and social distancing. And regrettably, whether or not how you behave in public with a mask or social distancing is taken on all these other attributes, and it gets in the way of a public health response. And so I think having kids as the messengers is so smart. It's like a secret, because who can turn away from that, right? I mean, and it just cuts through all the partisan wrap around it. So I'm really impressed with, I mean, I think that a lot of it is about norming and how do you make it just expectation that when you go in public that you're going to be wearing a mask and social distancing. And we're not seeing that in Itasca County. It's very worrisome.
Huh. Well, I would love to know more, because I agree with you that the kids are more powerful than even I expected. And then even if people are going, oh, you're brainwashing the kids, I'm teaching them the skills they're going to need to moderate Facebook, to fight cybersecurity, to resist hacking and trolling. I said, these are skills that are too overloaded to teach deeply and effectively and apply them. That's the deal. They might get taught, but then they don't use them. And as we know, that's how you build skills. So I think there is a lot of potential here. Thanks, Mary. I see that you gave me that. And Patrick Moore in Dawson, I think, is also on our board. Or he's not in Dawson, he's in Montevideo. But that's great. I'll reach out.
And Bud Stone over in Grand Rapids. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, good.
Question for you. Have you reached out to Katie over at McRosty Art Center here in Grand Rapids at all? Have you had any conversations with her about the Children's Press Organization?
I have not, and I would love to. So any suggestions you have for me, I will do that.
I'm going to give her your contact information, have a conversation with her to kind of set it up. But I think that what they do at McRosty is a perfect fit for what you guys are doing in Grand Marais. And if you're not aware of each other, you should be. They do a lot of art stuff with children, a lot of programming, and they're always looking for ways to engage more people in the community. And this is something that I don't know that they're aware of it, but I want to make sure that they are. And back to Bill's question about newspapers, I don't know if you realize it or not, but the Duluth News Tribune, which has been a standard for news for our community for years, even though it's 80 miles away from us, is struggling desperately right now. And they've cut back from a daily newspaper to 2 days a week, Wednesday and Sunday, which starts in July. And that's basically because of the lack of advertising due to the COVID problem. Our local newspaper is struggling as well, although they get a lot of local support, and I think that they're going to survive this okay. Only maybe they could look a little bit differently. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on real quickly is the messaging, searching for a way to engage people in the mask wearing. We have a group here that's headed up by Allie McInerney from the Blandin Foundation and a group of other people that have been trying to figure out how do we get younger people to wear masks? How do we get anybody to wear masks? What about the guy with the shotgun and the camel
Yeah.
suit on? How do you reach out to him? How do you reach out to people that it's not a way of life? And this goes beyond the political piece. This is more of a social way that people look. And I suggested to them that instead of trying to find ways to convince people to do it, just to thank them if they do. And so that's the slogan that we put on our Mask Up Itasca project, is a very simple thank you for wearing a mask. And I know at the chamber where we have multiple people come in, you know, for looking for information, different reasons that they show up at our doorstep, that simple sign out front that just says, thank you for wearing a mask, makes them stop and think about that just for a second.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's not, you're a jerk if you don't wear one, it's just thank you for wearing one. And my staff is directed to wear masks when they greet people when they come in.
Yeah.
So it makes that person, it doesn't shame them into doing it, but it makes them well aware of the fact that we appreciate the fact that they consider us valuable enough to protect. And I think that that may be something that you might want to add to your stuff that you're doing up in Grand Ray, just a simple little sign that just says thank you for wearing a mask. And it's real hard for somebody to pick on a business for putting that out there.
You know, you're right. That's great.
You know, they can't, there's no way to backlash that. You know, but I didn't do anything. I just said, thanks. If you're going to wear one, thank you. Appreciate it. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought I'd throw that on the table for you.
That's excellent. We should get together, maybe consider making a handbook or a toolkit about these gentle messaging so we don't provoke a defensive response.
Well, we have, from some grant money, I believe from the foundation, we have some masks that we're providing not only to the community, but to businesses. I have a box of them right out in front. And you'd be surprised when people come in without a mask and you say, thank them for wearing one, they reach for one. You know,
that's great. And we've got kids designing some in a mask challenge now. I'm going up in an hour to the YMCA to make these. And so far they all look like birch bark, but okay. We're designing masks to make them fun. Again, they're coming from the hands of children and building on what you're saying. Thank you. Maybe.
I think a little kid saying thanks for wearing a mask, Grandma. I mean, that does a lot. You know.
It does.
I think it's a good way to push that out and in a gentle way to say, you know, you should really be doing this, and if you're not thinking straight. So.
And they are the most effective, even if health-wise they're not the most vulnerable necessarily, though there's some implications, some are, but their futures are most impacted. So we have orphans, we're going to have COVID orphans. Just the implications are horrific.
Yeah, and I think as far as like a fundraising project for kids here in Grand Rapids, that'd be a great way to do it. You could use the money to put into thank you for wearing a mask project. You know? I
think that's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, I'd be happy to help.
Make sure that she contacts you, because I think that there's a synergy there that could be extremely valuable. So.
Yeah, I'll follow up. I like this a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Broadus, you said that the kids were raising money for good causes that they identified, and you gave the example of the log. Give us some other examples of things the kids care about that they've wanted to support.
They are. It's interesting. Two themes. They're in this small community where a high school graduating class is maybe 50 people. There's a lot of concern for the abuse of transgendered children. So that's a very popular topic, is trying to raise awareness for tolerance. But we're expanding that tolerance message to certainly the explicit embrace of the racist concerns that George Floyd brought to concern, and our own Native American. We have lots of issues up here. So it's redoubled our energy of inclusivity and tolerance. So that's one issue, the social justice, inclusivity, and tolerance. Then there is the issue that with the highway being built, they feel they don't have a safe place to walk or move around, ride their bikes. So we're trying to find bike lanes. Like, could we build upon and some, add something like a sunshade, they said, up at the park that usually toddlers use up by the Y. They said, well, we could raise money for a sunshade that you could spend more time hanging out when you're riding your bikes. We're just creating safe hangout space, I guess. But they see the need for practical things, and then the steps you take, like, well, who's in charge of this playground? We have to go talk to them. How do you find a sunshade? And now they're in supply chain kind of land, and it's fun for them. So those are the main things. And then the usual things like saving for college fund, but that's way too abstract. That's kind of rote. They just know you're supposed to save, and I would never discourage that. But when it's a little more immediate, like the log is perfect, because that's a felt need, and they didn't think they'd ever get it. And it's like, wow, I can do this. So yeah, you can. We can get $800 out of this. So let's see what else. Food shelf things. Yeah, pretty standard up here, because technology, of course, they would like to do more fun things. They want field trips. But that was before the era of field trips closed. Like, we were planning a field trip to Capstone Publishing in Mankato, which is weirdly one of the largest publishers of children's books because they supply libraries. And they were going to have us come in and shadow. They have 300 editorial employees in their North Mankato office. And we were building these field trips, and we were going to go to the Curlin Children's Book Collection at the University of Minnesota. That was exciting, a field trip, and planning that, like buses, stay, food. But that's not happening now. We haven't given up. So we're retooling. We're always up for ideas, though, Bernadine. If you know of other worthy causes that kids have been supporting around the state, we'd love to know.
I
I
have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if this is too deep, but we're so aware now of how our history classes in school didn't teach us about the Native Americans really being here first, didn't teach us about slavery. Are you getting into any of that truth telling that kids really need to know, so that they have a understanding of the actual histories of our country?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And that reminds me, Bernadine, I omitted the most immediate fundraising cause after the signs that we're doing. We're holding a book camp for 2 weeks outside later in the summer, and its focus is history, and we call it whole history, where it's a children's history of Grand Marais that starts both with the geology, the Native Americans, and then the fur trade, and then goes through herring, lumber, COVID. So, but to answer your question, yes, we have renewed emphasis on whole history. And in fact, I bought the URL last night, wholehistory.org. And I looked for woke history. Woke history is all taken, but whole history was there. So yeah, we are. Thank you, because I think it's far past time.
I see Jeff Borling's on the call. Jeff, can you hear us? I'm wondering if from your perch, what you might share with the group about the role you've seen of media in newsmaking and COVID response norming in communities that you're looking at.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bernadine. I know it's certainly been a conversation at Great River Energy about how do we communicate during these changing times, and certainly for, I'd say the first month or so of the shutdown, we deliberately shifted all of our own communication, and we've got our company newsletter, but also our economic development newsletter. And our economic development newsletter is really aimed at celebrating success and highlighting opportunities and issues in the communities we serve, which are predominantly rural. We serve 28 different cooperatives, and that includes the outer ring suburbs of the Twin Cities and some other, more populated areas. But the vast majority of our service area is rural Minnesota. So, we shifted and tried to just be another place that people could go to find direction they needed to get to the resources. A lot of that business focused, certainly. And, so our internal communication, we've stepped back a little bit more. We're still doing a lot of COVID related stuff, pushing that out through our social media and our newsletter, but we have started to, get back into some of the regular, topics that we like to highlight: need for infrastructure, need for different things to support economic development. you know, in my own experience, I'm definitely one of those people that reads the Duluth News Tribune a lot, but I've never actually had a physical paper delivered to me in all my time living in Duluth. So, you know, I think that's a real challenge for some of the areas I serve. For me personally, you know, it won't make much of a change. I already consume most of my media online. But certainly it makes me want, you know, I think it's just another brick, you know, stacking up on the side of we need more support for broadband as critical infrastructure. If we're all going to be consuming our newspaper and our news online, then we better all have access to the bandwidth we need to do that. So, you know, I think I'm also throughout a parent of 3. So, you know, we've navigated the online learning stuff, and it is interesting as my 9-year-old through school, you know, we just are not a family that gives our kids a lot of access to technology, right or wrong. You know, they don't have their own phones or screens or anything like that. And I don't like them to touch mine because it usually comes back cracked. But yeah, you know, with the schooling, my 9-year-old's had to get more online, and it has, you know, certainly gotten her more interested in communicating with her friends and in that way. And so now we're, you know, asking each other and ourselves all these questions about how do we provide that access, because we see a lot of good coming out of it. And we haven't seen any of the negative effects, but how do you know, navigate that with a 9-year-old in the world? And, you know, and then when you get into them consuming social media and news, you know, again, my daughter's probably a little more isolated from it without a screen in her hand, but you know, you can't turn on a TV, or, you know, kids are so observant, and certainly they've caught on to some of these challenging issues around, you know, will they, won't they wear masks in the pandemic? And you know, we've got family members who we visit with who have different opinions on these things, and obviously the racial tensions in our country that we need to face up and recognize and work to resolve. You know, it's all complex stuff, and it's all coming at these kids at once. And you know, it's been interesting to be kind of that filter and that person who has to, you know, deconstruct and take apart some of these media you know, snippets they're catching, and really try to explain that without, you know, the easier version of just saying, nah, you don't worry about it and hiding from it. So it's been an interesting time, and this has been very informative. I hope all my rambling had some value in it, but I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jeff. That was great. Is your 9-year-old your oldest child, your daughter? She the oldest?
She is, yeah. So we learn all the lessons on her.
Right.
Hopefully by the 3rd one we'll have it figured out. But then I imagine, you know, by the time my 3-year-old is 9, who knows? There'll be all new platforms, all new devices. Who knows what we'll be doing?
Well, you know, I know that most communities, however small, that have a school usually have a community education department.
True.
Not every community can have an Ann Bradis, but most communities do have community ed. I'm wondering, Ann, in your case, is your work integrated at all with community ed, or would you see a way in that some of these ideas could be promulgated or held in that context in other places where you aren't?
Yes, and I just give it sort of a tentative yes. Is the hardest part here is trying to find time in a child's life. So COVID is a weird blessing because all their sports and their school and their normal activities are off. So we published 3 books with children in May alone because children were remarkably available. So the answer, though, what you're after is if you know, school comes first, school and sports tend to come first in this community. So if those rev up, I still need help in finding the right way to regularly connect with kids. Right now it's sort of pop-up jazz improv, like meet me at Java after church, that kind of stuff, which is okay as a pilot, but it's hard to scale up. So I'm open for ideas. I had the higher ed knows of my interest, but they tend to want teenagers and adults. They don't know how to handle kids, young kids. So like book camp, I am working with, which will be in August, I'm working with Y and the daycare centers and Joan Drury of Drury Bookstores. So it's starting to be sort of a bottom-up business grassroots thing, which might be the model. But I'm totally open for all ideas, and I will thank you for reminding me. I'll go back to him and say, hey, are things different in COVID? How about kids things? But we're a good community for being outside. You know, we don't have the challenges some places do. Are the rest of you finding that your communities are pretty adaptable to holding outside gatherings?
I only know of
Well-
one thing, but I know our children's theater camp, they're going to do a 3-week program outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're doing some, the Rife is doing some outdoor concerts and movies and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's cool. And that seems to work so far. We've been doing it too. We just had Hamilton in the YMCA parking lot on 4th of July night. It's a drive-in. So, well, it was fun. It worked. And to all of those who mentioned Duluth News Tribune, I have to second the lamentation. That was one of the first newspapers I worked at, the Herald and News Tribune. And I am heartbroken to see it struggle. It was such a fun newspaper and a good one. Wow, we went all over. We had such a giant circulation area. Hard to believe.
I'd like to respond to Jeff. I loved your rambling. I particularly loved your observation that it's all coming at these kids at once. That's so precise and astute of you. And the other thing that I'm wondering if it should be coming to the kids is I just finished reading Robert Reicher's book, The System, Who Broke It and How It Can Be Fixed. And so the end of it is quite positive, but it goes deep, deep into the division of wealth, you know, talking about, you know, 10% holding 90% of the wealth. And so what brought this to my mind, Anne, is you talking about kids saving for college, when in this book it was pointed out all the inequities of you know, those who are really wealthy being able to get to college and those who aren't are having much less opportunity, and then it comes back to the debt. So now I'm self-isolated, I'm working from home, and but with 12 kids I have 18 grandkids. So my poor grandkids are getting all of these. I ordered a bunch of them, the book Lies My Teacher Told Me. I heard the review of the book. Let me see, what was the name of it? I've got it right here, of Surrender, White People, Conditions for Peace. Here at home, how much can I do at 76? But for my poor grand getting all this, they can understand, because we're such a white community here in Northern Pine County, you know, and have a lot of wonderful Native Americans. We just don't see them so often. And so I just think it's important for me to let my grandkids here in this white community understand the real world that's beyond them.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Good for you. Yeah, I'm all for that.
But don't you think that the division of the wealth, Jeff, what do you think about the division of the wealth, which makes it harder for all the economic development in rural communities like ours with low property tax bases?
No, I think that this pandemic has really been a stress test that exposes the weaknesses in our society, and that includes the economic divide. It includes the metro outstate Minnesota divide. I hear about it everywhere we go, and these issues have been here forever, and we're just seeing them highlighted in new ways. And I could go on and on with examples, but the outstate metro divide, to me, you see hospital systems out of the Twin Cities that own clinics and small hospitals throughout Minnesota. And when times get tough, you do see, whether it's intentional or not, you have to shore up the homeland and focus on the mothership, so to speak. And, these questions on what level of support will the outstate hospitals have when the main, Twin Cities area systems are struggling to advance. I also think that, white privilege and economic privilege more broadly has really, this is a tale of two pandemics in my mind. And I speak from my own position of being a comfortable white collar worker. My wife is a social worker with the public schools, and both of us were able to continue working remotely. Neither of us experienced a disruption in pay. Our daycare stayed open, but we chose to keep our kids home. And because of our privilege, we were able to continue paying our daycare bills because we didn't want them to suffer and have to lay people off because our kids were no longer counted in their budgeting. So, I feel completely blessed and privileged that, frankly, this pandemic hasn't, it's been an inconvenience, certainly. Nobody likes to wear masks. Nobody likes to explain to a 3-year-old, stop touching your face and keep your mask on. And, all of this has been an inconvenience, but we have had we're just in this cocoon of privilege that has helped us. We've been closer as a family, more time outside. I can list off countless good things that have come out of this for me. And you contrast that with someone who, is a frontline worker in healthcare, or even a frontline worker in the hospitality industry, or is a person who can't afford to stay home and lose pay. And we're going to see that only get worse. I mean, we have the unemployment benefits starting to wane, and more people are just going to have to go back to, whether they have underlying conditions or at higher risk with this COVID. At some point, they're going to have to go back to work, either because their employer or the community around them is opening back up, or for their own economic security. And I think that's just a real shame that, some of us have the privilege to ride out the storm under a nice sturdy shelter, and others have to be out in the elements, exposed to it, so to speak. And so I think that we as a society, if we have been ignoring or in denial about some of these challenges, I don't know how we can continue. I think they're highlighted. There's a big spotlight on them. And if we care about our fellow citizens having the same experience as we do, we've got to start finding ways to take this apart so that, outstate areas have the same level of support and opportunity as metro areas, so that people that are working minimum wage jobs have the same ability to avoid getting sick and avoid a pandemic in the same way that I do as a white collar comfortable worker. So I think that we have had a lot of issues in our communities and across the state of Minnesota, and all that this pandemic has done is really shine a spotlight on those and challenge us to face them. And I hope we can come together as a state and as individual communities and do that.
Wow, you're here. Becky, I wanted to add, oops, go ahead.
I just said thank you to Jeff.
Becky, I wanted to add about Robert Reich and some of his wonderful thinking. He had written about the future of work, in which he envisioned 4 categories, and that's part of my redoubling my motivation for working with kids. He said in the future, this pandemic's going to just reduce our work into 4 slots, where there will be the remotes, those of us who know how to work remote, the essentials. Then he said there will be the unpaid and the forgotten. Now, if that's the future of our children, I'm going to work night and day to prevent it. It can't be that confining and grim. And to build on Jeff's point, it must be more expansive, more fluid boundaries, more embracing.
And we all have to do what we can to make equal opportunity a truth.
True, nicely said. Yes.
Hey, would you say hi to Joan Drury for me? I haven't seen her for an age.
I will. She's recovering from a fall, but she's doing well. I will say hello to her.
I just thinking of sitting in her home overlooking the water. It's so beautiful. Oh, thanks for saying hi for me.
Of course, of course.
Well, I see we've come almost up against our time. I want to thank Ann so much for today, and thanks for making the effort to put that slide deck together. It really did enhance your stories to see those images from those kids. Thank you so much.
Sure, and I'll
Bill,
send
I'm
it to you.
wondering, do we have a topic for next week yet, or is that still in process?
Still in process, and this was super interesting, and I really appreciate the conversation and where it led and everything. So one of the things that I see in rural communities now is this economic changes in the banking. You know, so much now is big, you know, just a few banks run so much of the economy. And we could see the places that had small community banks, their small businesses were much more able to access federal funds. Their local bankers took care of the local customers. Now, you know, the bigger banks, what do they care about? A dry cleaner in Grand Rapids or something. And so it's just having that local participation, local strengths in the economy is so important. We don't have a topic. I think we might head back towards some broadband infrastructure services conversation, and but wide open to people's ideas for what they'd like to talk about and learn about. So thanks for any ideas you can share with me.
Yeah, thank you all. This is great.
Thanks for our core group here. We're developing a pretty good group of folks who are on all the time, and great conversation. The more conversation, the better.
I agree. And Bud, I'll look forward to hearing from you about connecting in Grand Rapids.
My CEO just called me, so I better leave. When he calls, I jump. Goodbye.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.